Hello, you curious people. Welcome to Curiosity Podcast, if I may call it so. The following is a conversation with Dr. Lance Bush. Lance is a PhD in social psychology from Cornell University and an MA in philosophy from Tufts University. He is the one who's most substantially changed my metaethical views and majorly caused my conversion from moral realist to anti-realist. His primary research interests are psychology, moral psychology, experimental philosophy, psychology of metaethics, the evolution of morality, philosophy, moral realism and anti-realism, metaphilosophy, intuition, and philosophical methodology. It was an honor talking to Lance. We had a fun conversation. We talked extensively about metaethics, moral realism, anti-realism, morality in general, his work in psychology and experimental philosophy, and we talked briefly about free will, changes in moral sensibility, irreconcilable value differences, and more. I've given the link to his Linktree profile and his YouTube channel in the description below. Please go check it out. Give him a subscribe and comment in his videos that I was the one who sent you there. I'm sure you're gonna like it. So, I present before you Dr. Lance Bush.
All right, what's up, everybody? Sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues and that kind of thing. You know, stuff happens. But we are here. We are ready to get talking about metaethics for Meta Monday number 3. This is actually the 4th Meta Monday, but I did 2 sort of back-to-back, so I was covering the same stuff. So I just made that count as the first one. This will be the 4th time I'm doing this. This is part of my attempt at a commitment to get on schedule with putting my metaethics stuff on Monday. I'll make a few more announcements before I introduce our guest. So I also have been doing lots of stuff on TikTok. So you can check me out on TikTok. If you don't know, TikTok doesn't just have shorts. There's also live streams there. And since I got enough followers there to stream, I've been streaming over there, and I'll be reposting that and I'll be premiering that here. So I already got 10 videos on there. So there's a ton of content that you will be seeing on YouTube. But today I have a special guest. I don't know if I should call you by your channel name, Curiosity, or
you can call me Curiosity, Abhishek, or Abhi, whatever.
Okay. So we'll go with Curiosity because that's what I see on my screen.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know if you saw the thumbnail, but I'm running with the cat theme. So I got a cat. Curiosity killed the cat. Is this like?
Yeah. I understood that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I feel silly explaining it, but I was like, okay, let me do some thumbnail
creative stuff.
So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and also I'll just tell everybody now. Your channel is linked right in the description, so go check out that channel and subscribe. Okay, go for it.
Thank you so much. So I'm Curiosity. I've got a YouTube channel in which I talk about science and philosophy. Recently, it's mostly been philosophy. So I don't have an academic or professional background in philosophy. So basically, my background is engineering. That's what I studied in academics. And then I did an MBA, which is totally unrelated to what we are talking about today. But anyway, I just got interested in philosophy in the last 4 or 5 years, starting 2017, 2018. And it just peaked up in 2019. And since then, I've been really very interested in philosophy. So I've been an atheist since when I was 12 years old or something, 11, 12 years old. That's when it started. And since then, it's only been growing gradually. I've become more atheist than ever. So philosophy is just another part of it. That's how I got into philosophy. It started off with atheism and debates online on Facebook and all. So philosophy is what helped me with my arguments against God, for atheism and all. So that's how it started. And then I started following some atheist philosophers, famous atheist philosophers. I don't know if you would like to call him a philosopher or something. But yeah, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, obviously. Unfortunately, he passed away a few days ago. and Richard Dawkins and all those new atheist philosophers. That's how it started, and that's how I got into philosophy. Then one day I was listening to Sam Harris talk about free will, and then I got interested in free will, but I just didn't understand what he was talking. I was like, all right, free will, I don't understand what he's talking about. Let's just focus on atheism. But then later in 2018, I got really interested in morality. I started following some YouTubers, atheist YouTubers online, like Cosmic Skeptic, Rationality Rules. So I used to watch their videos, and then I started getting interested in morality. And since then, it was just a causal link towards free will, and I got really interested in free will. And then some events happened in my life. Some people, not people, one person did some immoral things against me, and that was a whole other story. And that affected me a lot, and that got me into philosophy and morality even more. And then I started deep diving into morality, metaethics, normative ethics, free will especially. And I don't know if Lance, in my YouTube channel, I'm talking mostly about free will. I'm making videos on arguments against free will currently. So if you guys are interested, you can watch my videos. So yeah, free will, morality, and the other stuff as well, epistemology, metaphysics. I'm interested in that as well, but mostly it's ethics and free will these days, metaphysics, yeah, all of that. In fact, yeah, I'm a learner, self-learner. I'm not an expert, so I don't know how much credence you will have in whatever I say, but I try to self-learn. I learn. I try to be rigorous as much as possible, and I started off being a moral realist after reading Sam Harris's Moral Landscape and all. But then I slowly realized the flaws in his thinking and his arguments, and I found out Lance's channel and Lance's debates with others, and that just blew me over. I converted from a moral realist to an anti-realist in a matter of just a few weeks or months. So yeah, Lance, you can call the goat of anti-realists.
I wouldn't call myself that.
Yeah, anyway, the goat YouTuber of moral anti-realism, and he's the one who helped me change my views on metaethics. So yeah, here I am talking to Lance to clear some doubts that I have. But I would say I do have answers to all those questions that I'm going to ask him. But those are not clear answers. I won't be convincing enough if someone asks me that question. So yeah, I think Lance is the best guy to do that.
Cool. Okay. I mean, a couple things I could say before we get started on that. The first video on this channel was about free will. It was not about metaethics.
Oh,
so if you go all the way back,
seems like I didn't check that out. Yeah, I will try to check that out.
You can check it out. I mean, it's going to be a little rougher. Okay. I still don't have a studio or anything, but it's a little rougher because I was just starting out. I still haven't ironed things out. But yeah, I actually do write and talk and cover free will on occasion. I do have a few other videos. I did review a video with Inspiring Philosophy and a couple other people on free will. Okay. So you can find those. If you could just search my stuff for free will and you'll find I probably have 3 or 4 videos, 3 or 4 blog posts. It's nowhere near as much as the metaethics stuff. Yeah. I'm also about to hit 200 posts on my blog. So I've had it a little over a year. It's a lot of posting.
Great.
But yeah, I did see your content. It's a lot of videos on free will, which is really cool. Oh, another thing related to free will. So I don't know. Do you follow Majesty of Reason, Joe Schmid?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he just did a video responding to Trent Horn. Did you check it out?
No, I didn't happen to check it out. I would have to.
You got to check it out. It's phenomenal. So Joe has just been getting better. Like the videos were already good. Like they're more well produced than mine. They've got like graphics and imagery and PowerPoints and notes and
yeah, and it's funny too. Sometimes he is funny too.
This one is funny too because he and Trent like get along, and so he's very critical. But he he has a lot of funny reactions in the video. But what I love about it is how he's very on point with here's the problem, and it's just a laser focused demolition of Trent Horn's remarks. So I hope Trent sees that and goes, okay, I gotta up my game in addressing the free will stuff. So lots of free will stuff. And maybe we could talk about that sometime because I'm curious what
Sure.
you have to say about it.
Yeah, I'm
But I
about
think
to
today
ask
is
you that.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. So I would also like to talk to Joe, maybe if possible. Did you happen to see any of my free will videos?
Did I see them?
Yeah.
I'm trying to look. I don't think I've seen any of your free will videos. I'm gonna have to watch them.
Yeah.
No, these don't look super familiar, so I'm gonna have to watch some.
All right. You can watch if you're interested. Otherwise,
I
you might be
definitely
knowing
am.
all the arguments
I get all
already.
excited about it. So sorry.
Sure. So yeah. So we had a debate with Seth Garrett recently. First, I had it a couple of weeks ago, and then after a week, Lance had it as well. So I would like to talk about the debates that we had. Lance saw that video of mine, the debate with Seth, and Lance had his own debate with Seth as well. So I would like to have feedbacks, if any, that you have, and generally we can maybe discuss on the debates, both of the debates, and if we can lead somewhere from that.
Sure, let's do it. Where do you want to start?
Okay, so I mean, first of all, I would like to ask you whatever feedbacks that you have about the debate that I had with him, and maybe what are your opinions on your debate with him.
Yeah, so I had written you up something where I had given you some feedback. So let me have a look at exactly what I said at the time.
Sure. Don't grill me, all right?
Don't worry about it. I thought you did great. I know you said a lot of like humble remarks about how you were a little worried about how you did in that, but I mean, the first thing to say is that Seth is friendly. He's not out to do gotchas or to make anybody look bad. I really don't like debates like that. And so it's not the sort of case where I would say that anybody wins a debate. I think a good debate is a discussion. I mean, sometimes you might convince a person or make stronger points than another person, but that it looked like a friendly exchange to me. But I also just thought you represented your side of things quite well. All things considered, there's certainly room for improvement. There's a few things. I mean, one, I thought that when you raised the naturalistic fallacy, I kind of had the impression, and I will say this as a criticism, and I don't know if it's quite accurate or not. Sometimes what people will do when they present critiques of a view is they'll go and look up critiques of that view, and then they'll say, well, here's a critique that's out there of your view. Whether or not they themselves endorse the critique or have really internalized it to such an extent that they could use the critique themselves dialectically rather than just saying, well, what do you say to these people who say this? And there were a couple points where when you were raising objections to Seth's views, it looks like you were kind of doing that. Like, here's this critique people have, and I'm going to throw that at you. Rather than it coming from you, it felt like you were borrowing it.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah, so I had that impression. And if that's what you were doing, what I would say is, you have a few options. Is that accurate? Because if it's not, I'm very sorry.
That's kind of accurate. You can say, I just wanted to bring out now, if this is a scenario, then you have this problem. And if you're going to go that route, if you're going to make that move, then you have this problem. So that's what I was trying to do there.
Yeah. So one problem that can emerge for those sorts of critiques is when the critiques aren't responsive to the specific position that a person is presenting to you.
Right.
So, if I'm talking to, so here's the kind of thing you'll often see from someone that's like, I'm just going to argue for moral anti-realism. And you didn't do this. And this is why I think you did well. A lot of times an anti-realist will just say, they'll trot out all the standard arguments you would get in like the Stanford Encyclopedia. They'll be like the argument from disagreement, the argument from like Mackey's argument from queerness, and the whatever else, the argument from explanatory superfluousness, and they'll just sort of regurgitate other people's arguments. And when they do that, I just find it to be dialectically really, really ineffective. What I mean is, like, in terms of it being a useful way to engage in a conversation, If I just show up and I'm like, here's a critique, and here's a critique, as if I'm like throwing books at you that were on my back shelf that I didn't even look at, it's not going to be very effective. I much prefer when the critiques are more organic and stem from the person. And I think you mostly did that. And that's why I think it worked well. So that's a good thing. I would just say, like, if you're going to use those critiques, internalize them and understand if they're relevant in the conversational context that you're in, because often they're not. Like when I get in a conversation with someone, I'm not just going to whip out argument from disagreement. Also, I don't even endorse a lot of those standard arguments. I don't think they're very good. But I also am just not sure whether that naturalistic fallacy appeal that you made stuck. Like, I'm not sure that it worked. So I don't know.
I understood. I reflect on that. I did reflect on that after you gave me the feedback. And yeah, you're right. But yeah, I was just trying to, let him be aware of all the ways he could be wrong if he wants to take up that kind of a position. So yeah, that's what I was doing. But you're right. And I will improve on that. I'm learning from you, obviously. So I'm pretty sure I will improve.
I'm not the best debater in the world. There's a lot of people that have a lot more experience. Like, okay, one of the things I'm not the best at handling, and it's up to you in your future debating and discussing things with people, how you want to handle it. I don't do well when people are hostile, uncooperative, or seem to be out for gotchas.
Same with me.
Yeah, I get angry and then I want to yell at them. And I like, if I just start screaming at somebody, why are you being this way? Like, that's not, the conversation's over at that point. Now it's just a fight. Some people are better at finessing those sorts of situations, and that's something I need to work on. So, I would say that there's a lot of what I would recommend doing if you want to get good at debates is one, have a lot of them, and don't just do formal debates. Like, to me, I think a great place if you want to hop on Discord, find a bunch of servers, and just start getting into the voice chat and hashing it out with people. And that's a great way to get good at debates. I feel like a lot of people focus on more formalistic stuff, and they just like kind of don't get in the trenches and duke it out. And I think that's a really good way to learn patience, to learn to control how you're responding to people. But another point,
there's a lot of that in me. There's a lot of patience in me.
So you
please go ahead.
Have that. That's good.
Yeah. Please go ahead. You continue. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. It was one other point I wanted to make. I thought you did raise Mackey's argument for queerness, and so for anybody that doesn't know, that argument, the term like queerness there is referring to, like, it's just using the term in the sense of strangeness or weirdness. And effectively, what Mackey argued is that if there are these stance-independent or objective moral facts, they would be as he put it, metaphysically queer. They would be radically unlike the other sorts of things that we generally believe exist, and that this counts argumentatively as a point against their existence. Like, you wouldn't typically posit, like, imagine if a chemist said, I found a new element, and then the element is like super duper weird. If it was super duper weird and radically unlike all the other elements, we might think, I'm more suspicious than I would be if it was conventional and unsurprising. Now, one concern I have is that kind of argument is not going to work very well against a naturalist realist, because the kinds of moral facts that they propose that there are don't exhibit radically divergent properties. And so if you're arguing with someone like Seth or someone that seems to be a moral naturalist, that kind of argument is not going to work very well. Yeah. So again, that's a case where the argument needs to be targeted at the specific position that you're taking on. To give a simpler example, and this is very similar to Mackey's concerns, but I'll just put it in my own terminology and language because I don't care that much about the metaphysics. I care more about conceptual issues in a lot of these cases. Non-naturalist moral realist accounts often propose that there are irreducibly normative facts. They might say that there are external reasons, and these reasons cannot be reduced to any sort of natural facts. Now, if I'm going to raise a concern about the metaphysics of those claims, or the epistemology of those claims, or the conceptual coherence of those claims, I would not raise that same concern against a moral naturalist, especially like a really straightforward, like analytic naturalist that's going to say moral facts are facts about well-being, something closer to what Sam Harris says, because that kind of account, that naturalist account, is not subject to those objections. It's only applicable to the non-naturalist, not to the naturalist. So one super important thing to keep clear is that objections to naturalists and objections to non-naturalists will often diverge quite significantly. And it's worth noting that in many ways, naturalist realist accounts have affinities with anti-realism. I think it's like barely a type of realism. I know some naturalists are
Yeah,
find it
exactly. Yeah.
objectionable, but so I would be mindful of that. Be mindful to target natural, like, so you might have the bigger bag of criticisms that work against both views, and then you're going to have the smaller bag, which is naturalist only objections and non-naturalist only objections. And even those, it's not like a perfect fit, because there's sometimes going to be naturalist accounts that try to bring in features that are more commonly associated with non-naturalism and vice versa. So I guess like principle number one, when you get into a debate about these sorts of issues is, maybe this is a dramatic way of putting it, but it's know thy enemy, like know what positions specifically they have, and then target your criticisms at that. And that often means that like taking all the list of objections on like the SCP is just not going to be effective.
Correct. So not an excuse of sorts, but just wanted to say that, so I had put on the normativity objection for a long time. I was keeping on doing that, and I was like, once he wants to take a normative, once he wants to have a normative element to his naturalistic account, then he might have to, switch to non-naturalism. And if he switches to non-naturalism, there's this problem, all the problems that it entails. So that's what I was trying to do, because I was bored of giving the normativity objection. So yeah, that's what I was doing.
I thought from his discussion with you, and this remained true in my discussion, I wasn't quite clear on what exactly is meant by good or should or ought. So there are some underlying conceptual concerns, and sometimes ostensibly like a person saying, I'm a naturalist, these are just naturalist, this is a naturalist position. But then the way that they're talking or presenting the view, it kind of looks like they're bringing back in some non-naturalist stuff. So if your goal in bringing some of these concerns up is, okay, if you, and it's, you're setting it up like, if you do this, then you have this problem. Yeah. If you do this other thing, then you have that problem. That's a good way to approach things. I would be very clear about that and say, look, it sounds like you're presenting a naturalist account, but then it looks like some of the terms and concepts you're invoking are sort of actually moving back into non-naturalism. And then if you're doing that, then you're going to have these other problems that are going to emerge in that case. So just be clearer about how you're sort of juggling the positions, like conditional on this, you have this problem, conditional on that, you have that problem. And just be very clear what it's conditional on. And yeah, I think you could have said like, hey, it's kind of sounding like you might be a non-naturalist when you say that. And I do get this sometimes from non-naturalists, where they'll say, I'll ask them what they mean by good or should or ought. And the answers they give don't strike me as satisfactory. If the natural facts are just descriptive facts, so it's morally good to increase well-being. I don't know that what's added by saying it's morally good to increase well-being, because if it's morally good just means it increases well-being, then you're saying increasing well-being increases well-being.
Trivial.
Right, it's trivial. And so, so if you go around saying, hey, the moral facts are facts about what increases well-being and decreases suffering, the immediate concern I go to is the triviality concern, which is, okay, I agree that there's facts like that. There's facts about what increases well-being, and there's facts about what decreases suffering. Now what? Now I'm trying to decide what to do. What do I do with that information? And I think for most naturalist accounts, the answer appears to be nothing. There's nothing to do with that information. So it's just, we are putting a label on these sorts of facts. And so if they want to say, well, no, you ought to increase well-being and decrease suffering. What do you mean? Do you mean do you mean increasing well-being would increase well-being? I agree with you. Okay, let's say I don't want to do that. I'm still not going to do it. So now what? So that's what I see as the key problem with naturalist accounts. I don't know what to do with that information. And they might say, but it's true. That's where you get into these other issues like, okay, well, you have a truth that's utterly inert and trivial and useless. And if I add your truth to my model of the world, it causes absolutely no changes in my behavior. So what kind of truth is that? Okay, if the best you could say about your view is that it's true, tactically it's true, it's not very inspiring. And then they
Yeah.
might just say, I'm not trying to inspire you, but okay, well then your position is true and completely uninteresting. Have a nice day.
Exactly. What do you have to say about non-naturalist accounts? Like, are you compelled by any of those? Are they more compelling than the naturalist accounts? What do you have to say about that?
Whether non-naturalist accounts are more compelling than
More compelling
naturalist
than
accounts.
naturalist? Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say which are more compelling or not. I think that each of them are they're both
Have their own problems.
yeah, they trade they trade like good things for bad things. So the good thing about non-naturalist accounts is that they're very explicit up front that they are attempting to be practically relevant. They purport to provide us with a sort of practical authority over our actions. They tell us, they really try to say, no, we're not saying here's some inert descriptive facts. This is what you should be doing, and you're making mistakes if you don't do these things. And they have that sort of attempt at bringing in what has sometimes in the literature been called clout or oomph or whatever. And so what I see as the value of non-naturalist accounts is that they're actually aspiring to give us something substantive, something that would matter if it was true. That's the good thing. The bad thing is they trade that off by abandoning more conventional and mundane explanations for what things are like. Now, I'm not wedded to naturalism. I don't care about naturalism, the naturalism, non-naturalism distinction, but I am an empiricist. And if you're trading off empirically verifiable facts, like facts about what increases well-being and decreases suffering, for these more esoteric and obscure facts, then you're very likely going to be employing an alternative epistemological framework, because that's going to be the key difference is like empirical facts can be discovered empirically. How are these other facts discovered? If they're not discovered empirically, then what are you bringing in? Are you bringing in some type of rationalism, where you believe that you have a priori knowledge of certain sorts of moral facts that are not verified or confirmed or evaluated via empirical means? And then I'm going to have concerns with the background epistemology, because I reject that kind of approach. I'm not convinced that there are substantive types of a priori knowledge that aren't just matters of definition and stipulation. That is a controversial position in philosophy, but it is my current position at least. And so the issue there is that I think they have an advantage that they're aspiring to something that would be better if you could pull it off, the non-naturalist accounts, but they do so at the cost of bringing in metaphilosophical and epistemic frameworks that I totally reject, that I think are more dubious than a more empirically friendly position.
So yeah, some of them have the Platonism kind of thing going on, like the moral properties and facts are situated in a Platonic realm, like numbers and properties like redness and circleness or squareness are situated. So that's just queer, like we said, like J.L. Mackie would say. And we have no means of finding out where that realm is. That's just an extra entity that they're adding into the ontology. And like Occam's razor would obviously say that we would rather not have that extra entity or realm. So are you a mathematical nominalist?
Something like that. I mean, really what I would say is that I'm a pragmatist. And so I'm certainly going to reject mathematical Platonism. I don't know that commits me to any specific stance on the metaphysical status of numbers. But what I would say, generally speaking, is that I don't think that they have any special metaphysical status. I think mathematics is a construction that has been created by people. I don't think we discover it. I think we invent it. And if that sounds weird to people because they're like, oh, but we didn't invent, which numbers are prime numbers, there's a misunderstanding there. Now, that isn't to say I can't be misunderstanding things or that there aren't deeper problems. But what I would not be proposing is a very stupid, flat-footed type of construction versus discovery, where we literally construct every feature of mathematics. And so it's up to us to decide which numbers are prime or not. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is what we do is we devise certain sorts of axioms and theorems and those sorts of things, and we extrapolate from those. And we see what follows conditional on this set of rules. It's very much like the game of chess. The game of chess has been invented, but that doesn't mean it's up to it's not a matter of preference. What move would get you a checkmate in a very specific game setup. So if I set up an unusual, like I push the pawns in a really weird way and do a weird chess setup, there might still be a fact of the matter in those game circumstances, even if they're wholly unique and no human's ever seen them before, about like it's 6 moves to checkmate or something like that. That is a fact that in a sense you discover, but you discover these things within the framework of a constructed system. And I see mathematics as the same way. You construct foundations and then you discover things within that construction. So that's that, it's the same way in other games like Magic the Gathering. You can discover a combo between 2 cards that's really, really effective. That doesn't mean that Magic the Gathering isn't something people didn't invent. Clearly they did. So I see mathematics in that way. I don't think it has any special metaphysical status.
Yeah, same here. That's what I think as well. But you've just eloquently put that, and I've understood it more clearly now. I would like to give you an example of a non-naturalism kind of thing. Like, consider a person who is disgusted by 2 gay couples, and his initial feeling is of disgust towards the gay couples. All right, so these non-naturalists would say that despite the desire or the feeling or the disgust towards the gay couples, we can imagine some people who, despite that desire, don't want to act on that desire and be tolerant towards them. So they would say that that's a reason for action which is independent of values and desires. What do you have to say about that?
I'm not sure I understand what kind of concern you're bringing up.
All right, like suppose the guy who is disgusted with the gays, he says that my desire is to kind of stop him, but I have a reason for action that is independent of my desires to not stop them or not be disgusted. I mean, to allow that to happen. That reason is independent of his desire against the gayness of the couples.
Okay, what are you asking me about that?
I'm asking, what is your objection to that kind of a non-naturalist realism that they bring
Gotcha.
on? Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say is that in all of these cases, you always want to disentangle the normative considerations from the metaethical considerations. And so one thing that can happen when you address cases like this is that if you're addressing the metaethical side of things, this can often bleed over or be interpreted as you condoning or failing to take a stance on the normative moral issues. So the first thing I would say is that I would find this person's disgust objectionable. I wouldn't share if that was manifesting as a moral standard or an attitude, like they wanted to stop people or punish people or judge people that way. That would be bad. I would find that objectionable with respect to my moral standards. So I do think it's important to be clear about our normative moral standards and to distinguish those from the metaethical side of things. So when a non-naturalist realist is looking at this, what they might be pointing to is they might say, look, you might have certain attitudes, preferences, and feelings about what's right or wrong, and they can be misaligned with what's true. And they could say that does appear to be an indication of some sort of intuitive appeal of realism, which is that your judgments about what's right or wrong can actually be inconsistent with your desires or your attitudes or your feelings. And that might seem initially appealing at first glance. And all else being equal, it does, if there were no internal conflicts that people experienced about things, like if you felt disgust towards another person's actions, boom, you thought it was wrong, end of story. That might be more consistent with an anti-realist framework, because nothing about the phenomenology or experience of that would even begin to plausibly invoke some sort of realism, all else being equal, because it would just seem that our moral attitudes are just perfect expressions of our emotions or something like that. But it doesn't seem that way. I don't experience things that way. I'm sure other people don't experience things that way. To give an example that is maybe a less charged, sometimes if someone wrongs you, and this has certainly happened to me, I'll feel an impulse to get them back. I'll feel a vengeful impulse. Like I want to get revenge. And then I think, but I shouldn't. That would be the wrong thing to do. And so I simultaneously have a feeling and a moral judgment that I shouldn't act on that feeling. Now, a realist could point at that and go, aha, I got you, Lance. You actually have realist intuitions. But I think that the anti-realists have the conceptual resources to address these sorts of situations. Human behavior is a lot more complex than us simply having one level of desire, and then we just act on desire. So whatever your proximal desire is, you just act on. That's not how human motivation or deliberation or decision making works. People have they have compulsions, impulses, drives of various sorts, and that's all putting it in crude psychological terms. If we put this in more complicated, empirically grounded cognitive psychological terms, we would have to like really distinguish what actual psychological systems are interacting in the brain. They are not always unified in what they're prompting us to do. You could have one system that is favoring action to go to the left, another system that's favoring action to go to the right, and we work through that through a variety of methods that I don't understand. There's probably cognitive psychologists that understand the inner workings of the systems and processes involved in deliberation and decision making. They would understand them better than me. But the bottom line is, people can have, at the very least, very crudely, higher order and lower order goals and desires. So, for example, a person could have a desire to smoke. Let's say they're addicted to cigarettes, and and let's say they enjoy smoking, and they're not just like, I have an addiction. They're like, I like doing it. So that person may feel that desire. Ooh, I want to smoke, right? But then they also want to be a person that let's say they learn about how cigarettes are not healthy for you, and they would prefer to not smoke. So at the same time, the person has a desire to smoke, and they have a desire not to smoke. Now, the human brain isn't just this perfect logic system that's just one sequence of propositions. And so there's an obvious contradiction. They desire X and they desire not X. Contradiction, not possible, as if we're some sort of stupid robot and it's going to be like error 404 and our head explodes or something. That's not how human brains work. You can have conflicting drives and impulses, and like clearly, because people have these all the time. Again, I don't understand the underlying cognitive processes involved in this, but in those sorts of cases, you can have a higher order value and a lower order value, very crudely. So in the case of vengeance or the person you described earlier that feels disgust, that person may feel disgust, and then they might also think that disgust is wrong, it's misguided, I shouldn't act on it. That does not mean that second impulse, that moral judgment that's coming in to say, no, suppress your disgust, shut that up, that's stupid and misguided, that means that the wrongness of it is independent of your goal standards or values. Yeah. It could just be that you have a higher value beyond your sort of immediate gut reaction to things, and you are then sort of regulating one impulse in terms of another. In other words, the anti-realist can just say, look, we don't need to appeal to standards, values, and attitudes outside of ourselves to account for internal conflicts in our moral standards and values. We can do it all internally by saying one attitude or desire or position conflicts with another attitude, desire, or position. And they may have somewhat different phenomenology. They probably have a different cognitive etiology, like how they emerge in the mind is a little different. One may, and the other may involve another system. But the bottom line is the depiction that non-naturalists might present in this case might be psychologically naive and present people as psychologically simpler than they actually are.
Right. This is the answer that I would have given, but it would have been just one sentence or two, which wouldn't have been compelling. But what you just said is just, very insightful.
I often am way too wordy, and that's something I need to work on. If you put it in a sentence or two, how would you put it?
Okay, I would just say that the desire, what stops the guy from not acting on the desire of disgust, like subjective desire of disgust, is just another desire. It's just a conflicting desire, and it may be a higher order desire or a lower order desire. We just don't know, but it's just another desire. There's no mind independent fact that he's accessing epistemologically. It's just another desire. He desires to not act upon his initial impulsive kind of a disgust against homosexuality, right?
Yeah,
That's I
yeah.
would have just
Maybe
yeah,
there's a really concise way to put it that I could make an attempt at too. So I might
yeah,
say
yeah,
something like, in these sorts of situations, anti-realists can account for the psychology of this person as having a higher order desire or value that suppresses their lower order desire or value, and so they don't need to appeal to external reasons or anything like that to account for what's
right,
going on here. And I might add that the actual structure of how humans go about deliberating and making these sorts of decisions, like the nature of moral judgment, is an empirical question. And if we really want to get to the bottom of how humans think about these sorts of things, we need to do like cognitive science, psychological research, neuroscientific research. This isn't a situation where philosophers should be attempting to adjudicate these issues from the armchair without familiarity with the empirical work.
exactly. Talking about experimental philosophy, it brings me to the question. Could you tell me more about the work that you've done throughout these years and in social psychology, experimental philosophy, and what are the results that you were obtained on metaethics? Like what people think when they state moral claims or moral opinions. Could you elaborate on the work that you did and the results?
Yeah, so I've done a few other studies, which I won't talk about. I'll talk about the main sort of line of studies. So what happened with me is that I was initially intending to construct a new metaethics scale to evaluate what people's metaethical views were. I came across a paper that my advisor sent to me that was a new metaethics scale. I think it's called the New Relativism Scale. And the paper is phenomenal. It's a fantastically constructed paper. They put together scale items. They presented them to a panel of experts and had them judge the quality of the items. It's one of the best scale design papers I've seen. So I was at the same time both thrilled that this great paper was out there, but then like, dang, someone just did something very similar to what I wanted to do. And I got really upset. I actually left for like a week. I drove away and spent time with my fiance at the time. Who was living in a different state. So it really put my head to spinning. And I had to restart my whole idea about what I wanted to do. And I came back to the table with what ended up, I think, being a way better idea. So here's what happens. And here's what happened over the past 20 years in the experimental philosophy of metaethics literature. A lot of the early studies found pretty high rates of moral realism, but they also found high rates of anti-realism. What was interesting about this is that they would find that the exact same person, when you ask them different moral issues like abortion and like murder and that sort of thing, they would give a relativist response on the abortion issue and a realist response on the murder issue. What the heck? Realists might say, oh, well, as long as you think there's one objective moral fact, you're a realist, which fair enough. I agree with them about that. The issue, though, is that it's very unusual in academic philosophy for someone to have completely different metaethical standards, like diametrically opposed metaethical standards for different moral issues. Something funny was going on. And those suspicions, I've had suspicions for a long time. So what I started to think is, let me figure out what's going on here. And here's the issue. Almost all of the research in the psychology of metaethics, this particular area of experimental philosophy, relies on standard quantitative survey-driven research. What I mean by that is you get a large group of participants, you give them the same standardized set of questions, you record their responses, and then you compute averages, say of a Likert scale, like when it's agree, disagree, 1 to 7, 1 to 10, that kind of thing. So you get that quantitative information, and then you boom, you have your results. Right? If you're testing the difference between two populations, you could get your p-value, and you have all your sort of standard quantitative inferential statistics, which is fantastic, necessary, deeply important tool. Here's the issue. For any measure where you're interacting with human beings and you're presenting them with stimuli, this could be instructions, questions, anything that's supposed to prompt them to respond, and often the stimuli is intended to change behavior. But I'm referring very broadly to any questions, whether it's correlational or experimental research, anything that is ultimately employed for the purposes of measuring something about that person in order to make inferences about what that person thinks or their behavior or whatever it is. So it's the bread and butter of what psychology is about. It's about measuring behavior, and that includes verbal reports, like what they would fill out, like what they'd write down. That's all behavior. So you're studying behavior. So The stimuli is anything that is causing you to measure something about their behavior. Now, in psychology, validity is not what it is in philosophy. So in philosophy, validity has to do with the structural relation between premises and conclusion. And the purpose is to ensure that the conclusion genuinely does follow from the premises. That's validity in philosophy. In psychology, validity has to do with whether your measures are actually measuring what they're supposed to measure. So the example I like to give would be like a thermometer. If you have a thermometer and it's 41 degrees out, a good thermometer will tell you it's 41 degrees out. And when it changes, that thermometer changes in a way that coincides with the actual temperature. What you don't want is a thermometer that's miscalibrated. That's consistently telling you it's 5 degrees hotter or cooler, or it's random or whatever. That's not a good thermometer. It's not actually tracking the temperature. So what you need with a good measure is that for the measure to track the thing you're trying to capture with the tool that you're using. Now, when it comes to psychology, here's what's tricky about psychology. The phenomena that we're observing, like when we're observing behavior directly, fine. That's visually observable. You could film it. But when you're trying to get at people's mental states, you can't crack open a skull and see a belief in there. You don't rummage around in a brain and like get some neurons out of the way and go, there's the belief we were looking for. The stuff we're measuring in psychology is invisible. That's wild. It's invisible. You can't see it. So it has to be inferred from behavior. So there's always going to be this indirect sort of intermediary, which is that we're inferring the presence of like latent variables and these unobservable variables from something else. We're using behavior as a proxy for something else.
Correlation kind of thing.
Yeah. And so you have that. And then you also have, it's not like a Geiger counter or a thermometer or a barometer or these other sorts of tools where like we can calibrate them to where they are directly causally responsive to the thing that you're measuring. That like it's just if there's more radiation, boom, it goes. I don't know exactly how Geiger counter actually works, but all these things are sort of like causally more directly synchronized with the thing that they're measuring. But in psychology, you don't have a scanner where you scan this person's a realist, like a realometer, and you scan it over their head. You have to infer what they are from what they say and what they do. And so if you're trying to do that and you're giving them instructions, the instructions are supposed to prompt them out of it. Right. So if you wanted to see if a person likes pizza, you could put pizza in front of them and then like watch them eat it and see if they're like, yum. And like, okay, now they like the pizza. So when you give people stimuli in psychology, they need to interpret the stimuli in the way that you intend. If you ask a question and they don't interpret the question the way you intended for them to, your questions are useless. So the example I like to give is if I ask people, do you like going to the bank? So have you seen me give this question before?
No, I haven't.
Awesome. Okay. So we'll see if it works. Okay. So let's say I'm running like the Lance Bank, right? I open up the Lance Bank. I want to make a bunch of money and I want to find out where to put all like my ATM machines. And so I run a big survey all over the country, like all over the United States, where I say, how much do you like using my ATMs? It's a stupid question, but you ask that question. And what you find, and here's how I ask it, right? I don't say, how much do you like using my ATMs? I ask them this question. Do you like going to the bank? And then I ask 1, I hate going to the bank. 7, I absolutely love going to the bank. And I ask people that question, and I notice that by large bodies of water, along rivers and stuff, people appear to say like 7. They're like, they love it. And then like in cities and stuff, they're always picking 1. Should I put a bunch of ATMs by the rivers? Should I use that information? Boom, and just put my ATMs there? What do you think?
Can you repeat the last 2 sentences that
Sure.
you said? No.
So I run this survey where I ask people if they like going to the bank, right?
Yeah.
And in certain places near bodies of water, I get very high rates of they love going to the bank, and everywhere else they don't like going to the bank. So, and I'm trying to put my ATMs where people will go to the bank more. Should I open a bunch of banks like by the rivers and lakes and stuff?
No, I don't think that's a valid inference.
Well, it's not that I'm trying to say like I'm not mixing up correlation with causation or anything like that. Here's the problem. The word bank is polysemous. It can refer to a financial institution. It can also refer to a riverbank. And so a riverbank, that's not what I tried to ask about. And so it could be that if you ask a bunch of people, this is totally hypothetical. I doubt anyone would be confused, because if it says
All
like
right, all right. Now I get it.
yeah, so if the people that live near the river, they might think, oh, you're asking me if I like going down to the river. Yeah, I love going fishing there. Of course I like going to the bank. But by bank, they have in mind a riverbank, not a financial institution. And so your question could give you really misleading results. Here's the thing.
Exactly. Because the word bank is polysemous. Yeah.
Right. So if you ran that survey 5 more times, you could get the same result every single time. Replication is not the only issue in psychology. A study can replicate over and over, but if the participants in the study systematically interpret stimuli in different ways that exhibit the same pattern, you'll keep replicating the same misunderstandings. And when I say misunderstanding, I don't mean that those participants are, and this is why I like to say unintended interpretations, but it's very burdensome to have to avoid that, to use that language. It's not like participants are like stupid or don't know English or something. It's that languages are complicated and people use contextual cues. If I live by the river and you ask me if I like going to the bank, I might think reasonably, you're asking me if I like going to the riverbank. So this is a reasonable thing for people to do. The problem is that your participants in your studies are extremely reasonable. They judge things based on contextual cues. And researchers have systematically failed to be sensitive to contextual cues and pragmatics when designing stimuli. They design stimuli as if the language is straightforward, clear, and unambiguous, and then everybody's going to interpret it the same way. So that's a bunch of setup. What I did is I started to think that people are interpreting questions about metaethics much the way they interpret the question about the bank, where there is interpretive variation, that there's systematic variation in how the participants are interpreting the questions. The problem is that quantitative research is not the optimal tool for evaluating this question, despite its pedigree and its status as being the gold standard of research. Quantitative is supposed to be better than qualitative. Now, I did use some quantitative research. I did multiple choice questions where what I did is I would give them a sentence like that would be from a metaethics study out there. And then I would say, which one of these options most closely reflects the same meaning as that sentence? And I give them another one that's supposed to represent the same metaethical view. And then I give them 3 or 4 ones that did not. They were intentionally misleading. And what I found is that people would almost never choose the correct answer, the matching answer at levels greater than chance. It wouldn't hit 50%. It wouldn't hit, like, if it's a quarter, they wouldn't be much higher than a quarter. In fact, they would sometimes systematically favor like other responses that were not the metaethical category intended. So I did use some quantitative stuff, but the main thing I focused on was qualitative studies. So what I did there is you can give people a question, and there's several things you could do with that question. So I mainly focused on giving them the questions that other researchers used in their research. But I also would reword or construct my own questions as well, and then ask them about those. So there's several things you could do when you do that. You could ask them. In fact, before I proceed, I'll stop there. Do you have questions about anything I've said so far? Because I'm saying a lot here.
No. I just had the question of, I wanted an example on one of the questions that you asked.
Oh, sure. Let me pull one up so I could give it to you verbatim. I would prefer to do that.
Yeah.
Let me pull one up. Where is it? I just have to find one of the exact questions.
Will it take time? We can skip that if it will take a lot of time.
It's not going to take a long time.
Okay.
Projects. I don't have all my old research like out and ready like I used to, because I haven't been working on it a long time.
Sure.
Is it this one? Maybe it's this one. It is. I found it. Okay, cool. So
great.
Let's see. I have a bunch of data sets here, so I have to go through them. I have like 25 of them. Okay, so here are some examples. In fact, that's an example from someone else's research, so let me use one of my own. Okay, so one of them was this. So participants were first asked how much they agree or disagree with a statement. And it might be a moral statement like abortion after the first trimester is morally wrong, something like that. So first, how much they agree or disagree. Then they're told this. When 2 people disagree about a moral issue, do you think they incorrect? And in this case, I have both I think this one is one where I have a general form, but I think I also have an explicit concrete form. I think I do, but that one, I'm looking at an old template, so I'm not sure that it's clear. So let me move to another one. Okay, this is a better one to work with. Actually, I'll just finish that one up. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared for this. So okay,
no, it's okay.
So what people were given for this particular one was, when two people disagree about a moral issue, do you think they could both be correct, or must at least one of them be incorrect? And then they answer that question, and then we ask them this: please briefly explain why you chose this response. Okay. And so basically what you do in that case is they answer the standard question that they would be given. And then we just ask them, why did you answer that way? Simple as that. And then they get a text box and they just type in their answer. So they literally just write out in their own words why they chose that answer. Now, what you do with coding this is I used a quaternary scheme where I asked two questions. Is the response clearly an intended or unintended interpretation? Like, is it clear enough for me to interpret it one way or another? And then second, is it clearly intended or clearly unintended? So that leaves you with 4 options. And what I did is I tried my best when it was unclear to say, okay, well, it's unclear, but it's leaning towards the intended or the unintended interpretation. So if I'm asking someone a question and it's supposed to be a question about moral realism, a clearly intended interpretation would be something like, I answered this way because there's only one standard of moral truth, and it doesn't depend on my or another person's beliefs. Now that'd be, no one's going to say something quite, I mean, occasionally people do, but that would be like a very good answer. A clearly unintended interpretation would be something like, when people disagree, we're really not in a position to know which one of us is correct, so either of us could be correct. That's showing that they interpreted it as an epistemic question. And so their relativist answer is actually, I'm not sure one or the other of us could be correct. That's not relativism. So that's clearly unintended interpretation. And then if they didn't answer, that's unclear. And I don't even remember how we categorize those. I don't know if we put them as unclear. I think we put them as unclear unintended, but it might have been unclear intended. That sort of third category includes ones that lean one or the other direction. And in some cases, we had to make judgment calls about what to do when it's unclear, because it's very difficult at that point to categorize them. And you could collapse that second category into one overarching category of, we're not sure how to categorize these. It's like, don't know. So you end up with, and you could carve up the data in different ways if you want. But basically what that does is it gives you an index of, out of all the people that answered this question, what proportion appear to very clearly show that they interpreted the question the way you intended. And that is sort of your metric of the sort of validity of the measure. If that number is very high, that means you've got a valid measure. Then you have the clear unintended interpretation. The higher that is, the worse it is for your study. If that's very high, you've got a problem. The last one, you gotta kind of be agnostic. You can't be sure whether they interpreted it as intended or not. In those cases, I wouldn't say just assume that they didn't interpret it as intended, but it does raise a red flag if many of your participants are not able to clearly answer a question. So that would be a concern too. I'll give one more example. So here's one where we were directly looking at people's claims to see whether or not they interpreted the term objective or relative the way that they would need to in order for questions that directly ask them, hey, is morality objective? Hey, is morality relative or valid? They would have to interpret like objective to mean stance dependent, relative to mean true relative to the standards of individuals or groups, that sort of thing. So our question was, in your own words, what does it mean to say that the truth of the claim, quote, murder is morally wrong, is objective? And so there's both the murder example and I think the other example is abortion. Let me check that one. Scroll down and check out where that is. Can't find it. Where is it? Yep, abortion is morally wrong. And so the reason for asking a variety of questions is that people's responses to one type of moral issue might differ from their responses to another moral issue. Yeah. And so basically what you do in those cases is you're asking them, hey, in your own words, what does this word objective or relative mean? And you get really interesting answers. One issue is that quite a lot of people, when you ask them, what does it mean to say morality is objective, actually go on to describe relativism and vice versa. So I had to double and triple check the data because I was like, how is that possible? But no, you'll even have it in the response. They'll say morality is objective because each person defines their own moral truth. What? So like they're actually saying in the response, they're making it clear. Yeah, they were responding to the one that because I could have mixed up the responses and put the relevant responses, but that's not what happened. They just got flipped around. So that was an issue.
Okay.
But they'll all, sometimes people will say objective means unbiased, something like that. So the overall gist of what happened, and I say we because I had a second person coding a lot of this data with me. Now, I have a bunch of data sets. I have like over 20 of them. I coded most of it. They coded 3 or 4, but they played a big role in working with me on devising the coding scheme and refining and improving it and coding the data and working through the data with me. You can't just have one person code this data. I've also had a third person code a couple data sets too, because it's not just my judgments. Because that's one of the downsides of qualitative data, right? Is that if I'm judging cases like this, I am not unaware of my own hypothesis. And so obviously I'm going to be biased in favor of my own conclusions. So unfortunately, my coders were colleagues that are sympathetic to my perspective on this. So they're not unbiased either. So maybe we all coded in a really biased way. But the data's out there. This is in my dissertation. You could check it out. It's just an extensive amount of this. Now, I can summarize all of that stuff, like all the kinds of questions we asked, and how we coded that data and all that. The main takeaway is that across many, many, many different iterations of the data. Oh, I should also mention, I do also have a published paper with one of my my co-author, David Moss, called Misunderstanding Metaethics. And this was some preliminary early data that we gathered and looked at prior to me collecting and coding a lot of the rest of this data, where I was just coding up on myself for most of it.
All right.
Which is still a downside. It would be good to have more coders. It would be great to have it would have been great if I had like a team of students like coding all this stuff, but it's tough to get people to code this. Yeah. Anyway, all those caveats in mind, the takeaway is that across, lots of different data sets, the clearly intended interpretation rate is very low, and the clear unintended interpretation rate is very high. I also went through what's called thematic coding. And thematic coding, you actually identify the specific recurring patterns in people's responses. And what I did is I looked at, okay, out of the people that interpreted it in unintended ways, what are the recurring patterns and how they interpreted it in these unintended ways? And you do see a lot of these recurring thematic patterns. A big one being like epistemic interpretations, where they interpret questions about metaethics as questions about what we're in a position to know and not about like the metaphysics of moral truth. Okay, so I would say the takeaway from that is these measures are probably not valid. I don't think that these are good measures of people's metaethical views. And I don't think that they're good measures because when you look at how people are interpreting the questions, they're not interpreting them straightforwardly as the kinds of metaethical questions they're supposed to be interpreted as. And so you're asking one question and people are effectively responding to a different question entirely. I should also note, I'm not the only person that's done this kind of research. I did interview another person on my channel, Kyle Thompson, who did similar research for the ought implies can principle, which was qualitative research and looking at how people responded to these questions. So, I'm so sorry. I said so much there.
No. It's interesting. It's really interesting.
Years on this. So, anyway, talk about it.
Yeah.
Oh, and I was on Joe Schmidt's channel, Majesty of Reason, where we went into a bit more detail about some of these studies.
All right. So it's extremely complicated. We just can't get a conclusion. I mean, like these moral realists are making it too simplistic, right? It's just not as simple as they think it is. And you just have to get into the empirics to understand how complicated it is.
Well, this specific issue is not directly addressing whether realism is true or not. It's addressing the question of whether people without training in philosophy are moral realists or not. And the funny thing is, I went through all that explanation and I didn't even say what my conclusion was. So my takeaway from this is, so you have this issue, right? And the issue is, okay, well, if you ask a bunch of people like their pizza preferences or something, you're going to get pretty clear and straightforward answers. People understand questions about pizza, but they don't appear to interpret questions about metaethics the way researchers intend. So why? Why is that? Well, it could be that researchers, these are complicated topics, and maybe researchers just haven't.
Very abstract.
Yeah, it's extremely abstract. And that's a point that David Moss and I make in that paper, Misunderstanding Metaethics. We literally say explicitly, these issues are very abstract. They're very removed from everyday practical life. So it could be that we just haven't asked the question in the right way. And if we did, then we would find out what people's metaethical position really is. But I propose an alternative possibility. My proposal is people don't have metaethical views. They just don't have views about this at all. And the reason that they're not interpreting the questions in the way that researchers intend is because they don't have those concepts. That's not part of the way that they go about evaluating moral issues. And so the questions, they have to reinterpret them in line with what does make sense to them, which doesn't really have much to do with metaethics.
Right.
The comparison I use in the paper is Schrodinger's like Schrodinger's cat, where you have this issue of like there's different interpretations of quantum mechanics and there's different things that could be going on in these situations. Most people don't have a view about how to interpret quantum mechanics. It's not like they're implicitly, when they say like it's going to rain tomorrow, they're committed to the Copenhagen or the many worlds or the Bohm interpretation. They don't have views about it at all. And I think the same thing about metaethics. You don't have to have a view on are there stance independent moral facts when you say, hey, that's wrong. And to be clear, I'm also not saying there are a bunch of anti-realists either. I think people are just neither. So that's a big...
Understood. Yeah. Oh, so you were into a lot of complicated stuff. And how many years did you do this?
So that research, it depends on how you're counting. So I started at Tufts in 2012, and I got really into this topic very quickly thereafter. So maybe a decade of like me thinking about this. As far as running the studies, doing the research, and writing the paper, that took about 3 years on and off. So it was a lot of work. The writing portion ended up being the most extensive because I had most of the data. I ran a few more studies later on. But I ended up also in the dissertation basically reading at the time pretty much every paper that had ever been published on this topic, and then writing an individualized critique of practically all of them. So the supplemental section of the paper ended up just being this monstrous hydra where I have like 20-page essays dedicated to critiquing this study and another 8 pages about why that study is a problem and another 20 pages why this study is a problem. So it ended up just being so much work. But I really think that kind of theoretical engagement with psychological research is really important. And that, I think, capitalizes on my skills of bringing philosophy to psychology. So I really enjoyed that kind of work. It's hard to publish it because, a lot of journals are going to say this looks like philosophy, not psychology, or vice versa. So that's still a problem.
All right. Great. I wish I could do all this, but I just can't anymore. So, okay, let me ask you a pretty straightforward question. It's on your metaethical and normative ethical stance. What is your metaethical? I mean, I think you don't have a particular metaethical stance, but what is your normative ethical stance? You can answer
I don't have
both
a normative position either.
Neither that. Okay.
Yeah, right. I sometimes say I'm a retired utilitarian. I used to be a classical utilitarian, just like a total hedonic act utilitarian.
Okay.
I became increasingly disillusioned with normative ethics, and I just stopped thinking that it makes sense to think about my moral values in terms of moral theories. I have my values. I don't think that they have to, or in fact do, comport with any particular theory. So I just stopped endorsing one.
All right. Maybe I'll get to that state in a few years.
We'll see. I do worry it could play into critiques of anti-realism. It's like it's undermining normative ethics. You're destroying normative ethics. Maybe they're right. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. So I saw one of your videos with Kane B, in which you get to the end of the video and you wanted to talk about free will, but you didn't have enough time, and then you had to end the video soon. So the floor is yours. You can talk all about free will that you want. Free will, Lance is a free will quietist, if I'm not wrong. So
that's correct.
You can talk about free will quietism. What do you mean by that? Yeah.
So quietism in this sense I'm using very loosely, and what I take it to be is there could be a sort of broader quietistic project, but I'm sort of using a sort of local quietism. And the local quietism is simply that for certain philosophical disputes, if you take a step back and you look at what's causing the dispute, often the dispute is rooted in various conceptual or verbal confusions. And so if you say,
Correct.
okay, well, there's an ambiguity here, or there's a misunderstanding here, when you take a step back and you resolve those confusions, what was prompting or motivating the dispute in the first place just dissolves. So an example would be if two people appear to disagree about where to go. They're like, we should go where I want to go today. We always go where you want to go. And the other person's saying, no, we should go where I want to go. We always go where you want to go. And then you say, hold up. Where do you want to go? And the one person is like, I don't know, Chipotle. And then you're like, where do you want to go? And they're like, I also want to go to Chipotle. Okay, well, there's no real disagreement. They wanted to go to the same place the whole time. They just didn't actually get to the point where they said where they wanted to go. So once you get clear, there's no real legitimate dispute. They actually agree on where to go. Now, it's a bit of a silly example, but it illustrates the underlying theme of how a quietist would go about addressing a dispute between two people. And often the dispute isn't that they both unknowingly agree. It may instead be that they disagree about, like, is this particular position true? And one of them, by the term used for the position, they have this in mind. And the other, by that term, they have that in mind. And I think this happens with the free will debate all the time. One person might have this like weird, metaphysically substantive view about agency. The other may have something tied to moral responsibility. And if you just get clear on what type of free will you're talking about, I often think that the dispute will sort itself out, that people will go, okay, I don't believe in that sort of free will, but I do believe in this sort of free will. And what I think that the issue is that everyone tries to have an account of free will, but free will is this kind of, it's like a stand-in term. It's a term that is used to refer to a variety of very different positions from one another.
Right.
Drop the term and then just talk about the positions independent of the term. And I think a lot of the issues would go away. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them.
Okay, so one solution to that is maybe just specify what you mean by free will, or just name all of those free will positions their own terms, like libertarian free will for that, compatibilist free will for this, and then you can resolve all those issues. So yeah, that's a pretty simple solution. From I've heard you say that you don't believe in libertarian free will. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I haven't studied it well enough. There might be really more compelling, like what accounts of libertarian free will I've heard don't sound very convincing, but I also didn't read like whole books on it. So maybe they're better than I think they are. I don't know.
All right. No. From what I've read and heard, I don't think there's a good enough account for libertarian free will. So yeah. But yeah, the most important account, like term that is utility. I mean, what should I say? The most important term of free will that is useful, I think, is going to be the libertarian free will, because that's what's linked with basic desert moral responsibility. So if you go with that definition of free will, then we can change our criminal justice system in meaningful ways. So that's what I think about free will. Compatibilist free will, depending on the definition of the compatibilist free will, the free will skeptic and compatibilist might agree on that, but I don't think it's very useful. And I think there needs to be a lot of empirical study that's done as well, what people mean when they say free will. So what do you think about that? I mean,
there has been a little bit of research on what people mean, like what non-philosophers mean. I don't know of a whole lot of research on what philosophers mean by that. I am interested in, it's one of the rare cases I think there might actually be practical implications to a philosophical view. It does look like libertarian accounts of free will insofar as they're used to support retributive forms of punishment. That's a concern for me, because I actually don't think that retributive punishment, and I don't believe in basic desert. And so I don't really believe in retributive punishment. My view of punishment is purely consequentialist, and so this is one case where I think actually resolving the matter is important, and I don't know that quietism can fully resolve that particular issue. This is an issue where, in virtue of certain metaphysical and moral commitments, some proponents of certain views of free will and morality are going to favor actual practical implications of this. Like they're going to say, look, this policy, we should endorse this or that policy, where, say, they think we should punish this person, even if it makes society worse off. And that's going to be a problem for me. I'm not okay with that.
Yeah,
I don't want them doing that.
exactly.
So it's, whereas I think realism, like moral realism, I think is pretty much practically superfluous. I'm not so sure free will accounts are. And I think that's
Yeah,
because the way that they're cashed out is they're much more tied to direct practical concerns. I mean, we could see with the free will stuff, it's constantly coming up in like neuro law and like the legal implications of how. So it's these conceptions may be quite embedded in our criminal justice system in a way that I don't think metaethics is. Someone could
exactly.
dispute. It's not like I'm a scholar of the history of the legal system. Maybe someone would say views about inalienable rights or whatever actually are rooted in metaethical views. Maybe. But yeah, this is a concern of mine. And I haven't watched any of your videos, but are you a free will skeptic?
I'm a free will skeptic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I basically fall into that position the same way like I'm a quietist, but also an anti-realist. I'm a
Yeah.
quietist, also a free will skeptic.
Free will skeptic.
It's funny because like, like logical positivists, I am fine calling them like scientific anti-realists in a certain sense. But I think a lot of people that use certain kinds of labels in philosophy, when they take a certain metaphilosophical stance, which is at odds with the discourse, they often want to distance themselves from all of the labels. So a lot
Yeah.
of quietists wouldn't want to say, I think, that they're a realist or an anti-realist. They might want to say, this whole dispute is silly. I'm not going to pick a side. But that's, I think you could have your cake and eat it too here, where I could say, look, I think the dispute is silly and misguided, but I also want to make clear I definitely don't agree with those people. And so I tend to express my disagreement with moral realists and with proponents of free will. And so I'm happy to call myself a free will skeptic too. And if people don't like that terminological labeling because they think I have two labels in conflict, too bad. I get to call myself whatever I want. And if they want to call me
Yeah.
stupid for that, they could do that too.
Clip it out, guys. Lance Bush just said that he's a free will skeptic.
I think it's an easier summation of what I think than to just say I don't have a position at all.
Yeah, exactly. So we're on the same side on two things then.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right. So I had a question about irreconcilable value differences among epistemic peers. So have you watched any of Cosmic Skeptic's videos? There's one called Good Delusion, in which he tries to put a free will component to morality and tries to figure out a normative component to morality in the naturalistic framework. And it's a whole lot of mess, actually. So what he says is that, I mean, it's pretty complicated. I don't know if I could do it right now. So he puts it in premise conclusion form. He says that, okay, so the first premise is that we do whatever we do because we want something. That's a free will component. Okay, so even if we don't want to go to the gym, we go to the gym because there's another desire that's overwhelming on the desire not to go to the gym. So we do anything that we do because we want something, but we don't control our wants, so we don't have free will. And he then talks about John Stuart Mill and Derek Parfit. So Derek Parfit defines pleasure in the terms of pleasure is whatever is desired when experienced. So do you have a problem with that? I sense that you're not pretty convinced with Derek Parfit's metaethics. So, do you have a problem with that premise that says that pleasure is whatever is desired when experienced, and we do whatever we do because we desire that pleasure?
I have much more of a problem with the second part of that than the first. I mean, someone can
Okay.
always stipulate that what they mean by something is whatever they want to mean by it. So I don't think there's correct definitions of words. I think definitions are stipulated or presumed or inferred, but I don't think that there's a fact of the matter. So someone could say, by pleasure, I will mean this. And I think that which is desired when experienced seems like an okay definition. But the second part of that, it sounds like the idea would be that people are only motivated by pleasure. What's the idea?
Yeah. So I'll try to explain that. So he says that even if we do something that we don't get pleasure from, it's actually you will get pleasure from that. That's what he's trying to say. Like when you do good things for others, maybe it's at the cost of yourself. You'll have to give something away, but that gives you pleasure, even though it seems like it doesn't give you pleasure. That gives you pleasure. That's what he's trying to say. So he's just
Okay.
trying to define pleasure that way. But I don't
see
think
an issue
that's
with
you.
that.
Okay, do you agree with that premise then?
What am I agreeing with?
I mean, you do whatever you do because you derive the pleasure.
No, I don't think so. I don't think I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if someone ends up defining pleasure in a way where they basically are stipulating anything you're motivated to do, you're whatever the psychological consequences of voluntary action are, I'm going to call that pleasure. And so all voluntary action is pleasure oriented. I'm concerned that that's the kind of move being made, that it's sort of stipulating itself into being true. So you
Yeah, it seems
really
like
have to
that.
be careful with terminology here. You can always stipulate your way to a philosophically pyrrhic victory by just saying, well, by this term, I'm just going to mean something that entails this other thing. Okay. So, when you're talking about something like pleasure, philosophers will use this terminology in ways that it's not clear are connected to the psychological sciences in a straightforward way. So are they talking about a specific type of phenomenology, a specific functional process, a specific cognitive process? Like what exactly are they talking about? If you're going to use psychological terms, you could either really engage with the relevant cognitive psychological research and make sure that what you're saying actually makes sense and is consistent with the best available empirical findings, or you can appreciate that you're largely using sort of a sort of pre-scientific folk psychological terminology that may or may not track reality as it actually is. Just imagine how silly it would be if I was trying to talk about issues in chemistry, but I refused to use like the periodic table or the common stuff that appears on there. And I was talking about chemicals in terms of like folk chemistry. Like I was invoking like notions of like the Pokemon types. I'm like, well, it's electric type or it's metal type. Like that's not tracking carving nature at its joints or being scientific. And so when philosophers talk about pleasure and this sort of stuff, okay, if they're not tracking the sort of like natural kinds or like what these actually are, if you went and studied them empirically, like what I mean by actually are like empirically defensible, justifiable, like characterizations that would be this sort of thing that would emerge from a mature science. If they're not doing that, what are they doing? Are they just saying, well, by this word, I mean this? And then even when they do that, it's often underspecified from an empirical perspective to the point of virtual uselessness for doing some of the work they might want to do with it.
Right. Okay. So it tries to put in the normative component. He says that suppose I know some natural non-moral facts, but the other guy, say P, doesn't know these facts. So if I tell him these facts and he's compelled and convinced by those facts, then he will be forced to do it because you don't have free will. So that force is the normative component that he tries to add in.
That what? Who tried to add? Alex tried to add this in?
Yeah. He says that
I thought Alex is
because
an anti-realist. It sounds very
yeah,
strange.
he is an anti-realist, but I think he's trying for universal morality,
Okay.
universal subjective morality rather than an objective morality. So he says that everybody desires pleasure, and there are scientifically verifiable ways of how to obtain that pleasure. But sometimes people are wrong about how to obtain that pleasure. And suppose someone really knows how to obtain that pleasure, and he convinces this guy of how to obtain that pleasure, then he will be convinced into it forcefully, because free will doesn't exist. Because even if he because if he's convinced by it, he will act upon that desire, and that desire will win over. That's the kind of argument that he puts on, but I'm not pretty convinced by it. And then I'm not sure whether you've watched that video with Cosmic Skeptic with Ask Yourself, Isaac, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So those guys discussed metaethics briefly in a video, and Isaac was disagreeing with Alex on that, and he says that irreconcilable value differences will always be there. Will be there. As long as it is there, his account is not convincing enough, Alex's account. Did you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'd have to see the videos. Like, it feels like the kind of thing, it would be cool. And by the way, I am going to have to go in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Sure.
We'll have to cut this off. And this seems like stuff I want to like continue and talk about again. Maybe we should just review those portions of the videos.
Absolutely. Yeah. We should.
Why don't we do that?
We should do that.
We should just do that for another day. So I'll have to take a look at that. And I probably saw Isaac and Alex talking about metaethics at some point, but I don't remember it. So I'd like to rewatch it.
It's a pretty interesting video. I really liked it. I think you can do a breakdown of that video and give your opinions on that. And what Isaac gets to the conclusion is that Alex has not given a good account to show how irreconcilable value differences won't be there. Like, the values would match at the end of the day if non-moral facts match between people. So that's what he says, that if this guy P knows facts that this guy Q knows, then he will change his mind, and their minds will match, and there won't be differences between their values. So that kind of an argument for universal morality. Yeah. I hope you understood what I'm saying. I'm not doing this right, because
we just got to watch the video. So let's bank that as future stuff we'll do. We'll watch those videos, and then we'll comment on them directly. Does that sound like a good proposal?
Yeah, it sounds like a good thing.
Cool. Let's do that then. I'm always looking for stuff to review on Mondays. That's the typical plan for what I'm going to be doing. So
I've given you a good idea then for the next
and I'll just get the links from you, so I'll be able to find out the timestamps about where these conversations occur, and then we could just do that.
Sure.
So since we've only got a few more minutes, is there anything else you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one more question. Okay, I've just written that down. I'll just narrate that. So, okay, what do you think brings about change in moral sensibility or moral judgment? How does that happen? So, like, suppose there is a racist. He doesn't know about evolution and anthropology, and once he knows about anthropology and evolution, he changes his mind and he becomes an anti-racist. So there's clear change in his moral sensibility and moral standards that's happening there. So what do you think is happening? What is creating that change in his moral standards?
Well, it sounds like you're describing a fairly specific case. So there's a question of like what changed that person, and there's a different question like what causes changes generally speaking.
Okay, so I'm just trying to say that basically the answer is non-moral natural facts, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the thing. Yeah. Gotcha. No, sorry. Go ahead.
So what I'm saying is that when all the people get to know about these non-moral natural facts, their values would keep on aligning towards a particular one, and there won't be differences anymore. That's what I think Alex is trying to do there.
I see. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So the more people converge on the same set of non-moral facts, like beliefs about the
non-moral
non-moral
natural.
facts, the more they'll converge in the same moral values.
Yeah,
Is that the idea?
yeah, that's kind of the
And then they will
idea. And
eventually converge on the same values. Uh-huh.
exactly. And if your epistemic peers, there are no false lemmas,
Yeah.
and you have justified true beliefs, causally obtained, then you will align on your values.
Right.
And
So the first
once you
thing, and
align on those values, those will be subjectively equal. You can say universal morality rather than objective morality. Yeah,
okay, that makes sense. I don't think that will turn out to be true. I think people have
exactly.
fundamental and irresolvable differences in their moral attitudes.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that view strikes me as intelligible, as possible. It just strikes me as very unlikely.
yeah,
I do think that, and the main thing to stress about this is it has very little to do with realism. So
exactly.
what can happen is people may have the same underlying fundamental values or preferences, but they end up having different sort of concrete moral standards, like moral practices and preferences and things that they support, because they have differences in their non-moral beliefs. So imagine there's two people that both say, I want to favor the criminal justice system that optimizes for low crime. And then one of them thinks long prison sentences is the best way to achieve low crime, and the other thinks short prison sentences is the best way to achieve low crime. And there's going to be an empirical fact of the matter about which prison system works better. Maybe it's no prison system. Maybe there's some other fact of the matter. And let's say they come to discover that empirical information, one or the other of them is going to change to adopt the other's view. So let's say one turns out to be right. Now the other go, oh, I guess you're right all along, because all along they actually wanted the same thing, which is less crime. And so they end up favoring the same position. So what you're seeing there is that as people acquire more and more information, they tend to act more in accord with they basically align that information with their own goals and values. And so as people obtain greater and greater accurate information, if they have similar values, then they will end up endorsing similar policies and engaging in similar actions. So really what you're not finding moral realism, you're just finding, oh, these people actually just share the same values. So yeah, that seems, and I think there would be a great deal of that. In other words, I think if everybody believed all the same non-moral facts, that probably, I actually think most moral disagreement would disappear. I think most of it, but not all of it.
Right. So if all our knowledge is the same, if we believe all the propositions are same, then it's quite possible that our values align. But it's not a necessity that our values align, right?
Yeah, I certainly don't think it's necessary. Some people might have the view that, like, in virtue of us being rational agents, there's going to be some fact of the matter about what we would endorse under optimal conditions where we're fully informed and ideally rational. And so everybody in principle would necessarily converge in extremis. Like asymptotically, we would approach perfect uniformity in our beliefs. I see no reason to think that that's true. And every reason to think that people can and probably do just care about different things than one another.
Right, like some people will have deontological impulses and some people will have consequentialist impulses. Some people would like to promote well-being, for example. Some people would like to honor well-being. So those kinds of differences will be there. I mean, it's not a necessity that all of them will align on the same kind of values, right?
Right. People seem to have sometimes this strange notion that, like, human minds are not these contingent things that are products of the way that our biological and cultural evolutionary history has shaped them to be, and that, like, really we're like these, like, I don't know, universal Turing machines that all are going to converge in this like profound space outside of like the weird vagaries and contingent factors that have influenced us. It just seems very strange to me. I mean, just imagine thinking, for instance, that everybody would share the same food preferences if they got to try all the same. This is just not going to happen. It's just our mouths are different. And the wiring of our brains in terms of how we appraise situations is just going to be different from one person to another. And I don't think that those differences are all about, they're not all subordinate to or a product of rational considerations and logic. They're ultimately at their foundation a lot like food preferences.
Right, correct. But you're a gastronomic realist, aren't you?
I am not a gastronomic realist. I use it as a joke to talk to people.
And I just read your blog.
Yeah. It's a fun comparison, and it originates with Don Loeb. So give all the credit to Don Loeb and check out his paper, Gastronomic Realism and
Okay,
Cautionary.
you have a video with him as well, right? I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, check it out. Don Loeb is fantastic.
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to think of him as a friend. I hope he considers me one. We've spoken a whole lot. I hope eventually I get to work with him on something. But Don Loeb is great. So I am going to have to wrap things up in a couple minutes. So we're just. I feel like we didn't get to finish this conversation. So I'd like
right. And you know what? To be honest, I didn't sleep well yesterday, and I was a bit tired. I couldn't, put across my points in the perfect way because English is not my first language. I would have done that better if I had a good sleep, or maybe I think. But yeah, we should have another conversation in the future.
Well, I thought you did fine. In some cases, it seemed like you were like, I'm not putting this together the way I wanted to, and that's totally fine. I have days like that myself. Sometimes I hop in a live and I'm like, I regret this already. So, but I'm just gonna keep doing it. Sometimes you got bad days, you got to go to work.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's do this again. I had a lot of fun. I feel like the time flew by. So I spent way too much time talking about my studies. Ugh.
No, that's okay. That was the most interesting part, I would say. I learned a lot from that. Yeah.
At some point, I'm going to have to give people concrete examples. It's just the kind of thing that requires a bit of setup and preparation for me to be like, here's some good examples. It takes more work to do that sort of thing. But I have people waiting for me, so I have to get going.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, it's all good. So everybody, do go check out Curiosity's channel. Link is in the description. We will be back to talk again another time. We'll work out when we set that up. Maybe we'll review Alex and Isaac's discussion or something. But other than that, like the video, check out the description. I did update my description, so now I have one Linktree link that will take you to all my social media and support and blog and all, an academic page. I have a new academic page, so lots of updates. But I got to get going now, so just go check out that link, and I will see you all later. Take care, everybody.